Hi there, my name is Korame, and today in this guide I'm going to be teaching you guys how to play Provoker in patch 10.0.7, mostly for Mythic Plus. Later on I'll have like a raid guide, and I have other raid related things on my channel if you guys want to check this out, but this guide is mostly just going to be about Mythic Plus. So if you've been playing Provoker up until patch 10.0.7, then you'll understand that Provoker recently just got nerfed. Up until this point, this class was the strongest healer by large and by far when it came to Mythic Plus. This healer has a lot of burst on-demand healing, a lot of CDs, and a kit that's pretty well developed just for a 5-man group. Things like Zephyr and how many targets are getting hit by your temporal anomaly, or I should say how many were, all seemed really catered to a 5-man group. This class is also able to do a lot of damage without having to put in a lot of globals, making it very efficient. Every 30 seconds you use Fire Breath. From that Fire Breath you get 5 Leaping Flames procs, which I'll go over later. Anyways, it basically means that even if you're only DPSing like about 5 seconds out of like every 30-second like window, especially on things like AoE, this class is able to do really good damage without having to spend a lot of globals, unlike some other classes. It is not primarily like a dot class. It does have some pretty powerful heal over time classes, though it also has a lot of strong burst healing. So you do kind of have to play around the HOTS the same way you would a Resto Druid, but I would say that also has like some really strong burst healing, like the same way that you would expect from like a Resto Shaman right now. So before I get too much into the details of the gameplay, I do want to just start off with talking to you about how to set up your character, meaning things like race, even though you can only be one race, and that's Drakthir, and in this case it's just going to be talking about these stats and trinkets and things like that that you're going to be going for, the gear that you want. Okay, so for Preservation Evoker, your best stat right now, and this could change next patch, is going to be Critical Strike. So Critical Strike is good for damage, and also it's really good for your reversion healing. So reversion, every single time it critically strikes, it extends the time on the hot. So every single point of your like critical strike you get, the next point is more valuable. This is a lot different than other classes that usually hits like some diminishing returns on stats pretty quickly. Every point of critical strike you get, the next point is more valuable because it's just going to keep on extending your reversions, which means you don't have to put them out as often, and you have a lot of talents that are going to feed into some synergies with reversion as well as your tier set 4-piece. So of course you are going to want your 2-set and your 4-set in order to do Mythic Plus. The 4-set is really strong inside of Mythic Plus. Its reversion healing has a chance to cause your next Living Flame cast to be instant and deal 20% increased healing or damage. So this means you want to have as many reversions out as possible all the time in order to be getting these procs. These procs are good primarily for damage, but can also be used for spot healing. And then the 2-set and power spells increase reversion's chance to critically strike by 25%. So basically just means that in order to keep extending your reversions as long as possible, you're going to be wanting to be pressing an empowered spell every 6 seconds or so. After a critical strike, your next best stat inside Mythic Plus is either going to be Verse or Haste. So this is a question that I get a lot. The number one question that I think I get the most often is, how much haste do you have? Is there a certain amount of haste that we want? Like questions like that. So there are a lot of other evokers that prefer more haste to verse. I, however, prefer more verse to haste, and I would say that it's more just about like comfort on how much of each you would want. So in my mind it goes crit, and then it goes verse is equal to haste, and then all of that over mastery. So verse and haste, good for doing more damage and all that kind of stuff. However, mastery doesn't contribute to your damage at all. That is mostly a raid stat. In raid you want a lot of mastery. In Mythic Plus you do not want any other mastery, or as little as you can. Of course, there are things like your staff, which you also want, which is Carnalix the First Light. This is an evoker only staff, and it comes from the second to last boss, which is Brewkeeper Diana inside of the current raid. It has a 3-minute cooldown, and it does a lot of damage. So if we check out, what is this? An Azure Vault? How much healing did it do? Okay, so it did about 8.5% of my damage just from this one weapon. So this is a mythic level weapon. If you only have, another question that I will commonly get asked is, hey, I have a heroic Carnalix the First Light, and then so it's 411, and then I got this 421 weapon out of my vault. What should I wear? The best thing you can actually do is set up a swap weapon macro. So inside of keys and inside of raid combat, the only thing that you cannot ever switch out like your rings and your trinkets or any other gear or your talents, but you actually can swap weapons while you're in combat. So all you have to do is put this on when it comes off CD every 3 minutes, use it, and then switch back to your other higher eye level, or maybe it's just better statted or it has a tertiary on it weapon that you want to use. So keep that in mind if you get like a heroic one and you're like really wanting like a mythic one and thinking, I don't want to have to wear a 411 stuff. You don't have to. Just set up the swap weapon macro. Outside of that, so I told you about the stats and that you want 4-piece for all of these slots. As far as your embellished item goes, I would suggest number 1 that you have an elemental lariat, and then for your second one, I would say there are about 2 options. The first one is going to be the one that increases your Dragon Isle potion duration by 50%. This is nice because it's good for raid and it's good for Mythic Plus. This is the one I've always used. The one I haven't used that I've seen others use, especially inside of raid, not as much inside of keys, is the Toxic Venom Stompers, which make it so that you lose some of your lowest stat and gain some of your highest stat. So that's also a good option, especially if boots are your worst option. Most of the time I would suggest you put this on your ring. However, it is not on my ring. It wasn't my ring at the beginning. I recently just swapped it after I got another spark. However, there are really good rings inside of the raid and now outside of the raid with patch 10.0.7, so the ring might not be the best option for you in the long term, but short term, getting a free socket is pretty dang nice. So Seal of Darkness Chosen is, if you can get this, it is so good. It does a lot of free damage for you. So it procs off of fire damage and it leaves a dot on the target. So you can see for me, that ring does 2.6% of my damage, which is really, really good. And then there is also the ring off of Brewkeeper Diurna. I wish I'd ever gotten it, but I've never looted it, so I can't talk too much about it, but to say it is pretty good. It gives you a shield whenever you do fire damage. I'll pop that up here. And then, of course, you probably want to hear about this Onyx Amulet, which is the new ring that was added in 10.0.7. So I have been running this inside of dungeons that don't require a lot of healing. So that mostly means things like Azure Vault and Academy. Outside of that, if a dungeon requires a decent amount of healing, or I'm scared, like especially like on high tyrannical keys, of getting one shot by things and stuff like that. So like I want like the things like the verse or just be able to heal through something, then to me, it's not really worth giving it the secondary. I think it's way more important to like keep the group healthy and comfortable and not risk any deaths, especially deaths on my own, than whatever damage you get from this. As far as the combinations, if you do want to run the ring, so the best options are Desirous Bloodstone, Twilight Stone, and the best option isn't actually Freezing Ice Stone. It is this one. It is the Storm Infused Stone. However, if you wear this one, so it's based off of critical striking, which you critically strike a lot, so you can do a lot of really good damage with it. Like I've ran it in keys before I found out about this, but it will ninja pull, meaning pull mobs that like aren't in combat. And to me, that is just not worth the risk of wearing this, because if that happens during a key, we pull something that's not in our route, or like my tank wasn't ready or something for it, and like we end up wiping or doing anything like that, then like any damage gain you got from that, just absolutely not worth it. This is good single target. It's less like overall damage, but it's still pretty good. I think in the damage breakdown I just showed you, I was wearing it. So you can see the Freezing Ice Stone and the Desirous Bloodstone. Pretty similar. I think when I was wearing like the Freezing Ice Stone, like inside of Azure Vault, it was actually doing closer to like 5 mil instead of this just doing 3.3, but also that was also during like a fortified week when I was wearing that. So it's not really a 1-to-1 ratio. It was also 28, whereas this was only, this is from a sale, so it was only a 25 that we did yesterday. Anyway, I just want to use that as an example. And then as far as your trinkets go, so the best trinket that I would highly recommend if you can get it, that you definitely wear it, is the Brewkeeper's Promise. This is so much like free healing, usually almost always on your tank. There are a few places where I would suggest putting it on like a ranged DPS, especially like I think the only place I like actively do it is for like the second boss in court. I'll put it on like the Boomkin or the Shadow Priest, and I know some evokers like to put it on the ranged DPS on like a fortified or even a tyrannical like Ruby, like anything that's hard to heal. It's hard to keep that like squishy range class, especially if something like a Hunter alive. It is really good. Otherwise, just a lot of free healing, and it's free stats on yourself and one other party member, so it's really, really good. Some other good trinkets, of course, the Whispering Incarnate icon. I wear it even though I only have a heroic one, just because it gives stats to everyone else in my group who is also wearing one. Some other great options are the Iceblood Dust Snare, which is off of Senarth inside the raid. The Chill Globe is actually potentially a lot of really good damage, but you can't really guarantee that you're going to get like the benefit of that full damage, because most of the time you're going to fall below 60% mana in a lot of these dungeons. So if you're struggling with mana, I would suggest wearing it. This was like what I wore most of the time before I got the Incarnate icon, so I would suggest it. You can also get a Rage Feather, which is a damage trinket that drops a no-code. You just want to make sure that you're setting your loot specialization to Devastation. Sometimes I play with the jewel crafting one. This is only in like really heavy healing situations, and it's pretty rare that I ever put this one on. And then the Evoker's Codex, which drops at the last boss. I just recently haven't got to experiment with much. I'm trying to remember if there's any other great trinkets. The only other one I can think of is like the Shadow Gem inside of Shadow Moon. That one's a pretty good one if you can remember to use it in heavy healing situations. So there's a lot of really good trinkets. I'd say the only one that feels like required, like you really want it, is the Broodkeeper's Promise. Like if you get Heroic one, definitely wear that if you can. That's what I would suggest. It is a lot of free healing. Let's see right here. Yeah, it is so much free healing for you during the dungeon. So highly suggest that one. Okay, now moving on from setting up your character with your stats and your gear, let's start talking about talents and then we'll get into gameplay. So this is going to be my most basic go-to talent setup, at least over here on this side for week to week. So I'm not going to talk too much about like the choices up here because there's not really a lot of choices. These are just spells that you have to spec into because you need them for your kit, including Echo, Dream Breath, which is your most powerful and power spell in my opinion, Reversion, which I talked to you before, which is your heal over time that can be like extended if you have it critically strike. It also has the synergy with your 4-piece and your 2-piece. And then whenever you cast Living Flame, you get a chance for Essence Burst, which gives you a free, you can either spend your essence on Echo, Emerald Blossom, which you're not really spending that much on in Keys, or on Disintegrate, which can give you mana back if you're taking Energy Loop down here. So I'm getting ahead of myself. And Essence Attunement just makes it so it stacks up to 2 times. Spirit Bloom, which is another Empower spell use. This is more instant healing, whereas Dream Breath has a heal over time component to it. And then Time Dilation, which is your external. Okay, now beyond that is basically where like the choices kind of start. So I'm going to start straight down the middle. So this is Life Giver's Flame and Life Force Mender. These make up a lot of your damage. So Life Giver's Flame, when you fire breath, you heal a nearby injured ally for 8% of your damage on up to 5 targets. This is like okay healing. Let's see where it is. It's like right below like Rewind, but the thing is like this isn't always like predictable and reliable healing for the most part, so you don't rely on it a lot except for maybe like tank healing. It's really good on like a big pack because usually the only one that's taking damage, so it's really good for healing your tank. But the real money in putting the points in here is you're putting 2 points down here into Life Force Mender. Like if you're not ever going to just put 2 points in Life Giver's Flame and not going to Life Force Mender. Like these two things go hand in hand, and this increases the damage that your Fire Breath and your Living Flame do proportional to your maximum health, so it's going to scale over time as we go through the expansion. So these are both really good. Okay, now looking at the rest of the tree, so you can kind of think of this tree as being like split into like this side over here. These are all the bronze spells. This over here is kind of all the green spells, and down the middle is like a mix for the most part. So this tier, we're basically focusing a lot on the bronze spells. So that's kind of a giveaway with like how our 2-piece and 4-piece work right now. They're both work up of reversion and having reversions out all the time. And the best way to have reversions out is by spreading reversions with echoes. The best way to get echoes out is by using Temporal Anomaly and specifically using Resonating Sphere. I'm trying not to get ahead of myself and get into playstyle too much, but I do still play Resonating Sphere, so if you've been playing Evoker before 10.0.7, you're familiar that Resonating Sphere was nerfed from hitting 6 allies to only 4 allies with an Echo, and also like the scaling that you get with your Lifeline on those Echoes, and the Golden Hour value that you get is also now reduced by the effectiveness of the Echo, which was a very large nerf, and is part of the reason that Evoker is still strong, but no longer like the king of Mythic Plus. So I just kind of mentioned it, Golden Hour, really strong, makes it so your version heals for 50% of damage taken in the last 5 seconds. Very similar to Rewind, where you want to be paying attention to how much damage someone has been taking in order to use this correctly. Time Lord replicates 50% more healing from your echoes. That is, I've seen some evokers decide not to take this. I always think that is a mistake. I think that this is really good if you're taking Resonating Sphere, or even not, as long as you're going down this path. And then here you get 2 reversion charges. Energy Loop, really great way to do extra damage and also to get mana back by spending your essence on Disintegrate instead of using it on echoes. Really good. Timeless Magic gives you a longer duration on some of your bronze spells. And then Stasis is another really powerful CD. So our biggest CDs are going to be Stasis, Rewind, and then we're going to go over here to the green side, and this is going to be Emerald Communion. So Emerald Communion reads as just a personal because it heals you over time and also restores mana. However, if you leverage Emerald Communion with Lifebind, then it becomes a group-wide CD. You just need to make sure you put echoes out on everyone, Verdant Embrace, so it applies Lifeline to everyone and does more healing. I'll explain more of that later. Right here, you can go either way. You can go Rush of Vitality, which makes it so that your Emerald Communion is also like a defensive, and also just for healing, because you're going to have more health. Or you can go over to Dreamwalker, which makes it so you can move. Otherwise, you can't move while you're inside Emerald Communion. However, if you play Rush of Vitality, you can hover before, and then you are able to move while you're in your Emerald Communion. It just requires you to like spend that extra GCD and have that forethought before. So it's like you gotta put out your echoes, and then you need to hover, and then you need to Burn Embrace, and then you need to Emerald Communion. It's a lot of setup to remember. So most of the time when you're just like starting out, I would suggest you just play Dreamwalker. And later on when you're more comfortable, you can go over here. It's really not that big of a difference, but this one, more often than not, you're probably gonna end up playing better because you're playing this in most keys. And then really important that you always get to Call of Viscera. This is a really powerful single talent point. So super important that you get here. Okay. So this is my go-to normal build. There are some times where I change it though, and especially coming out of 10.0.7, I found myself changing it more. So I would say before, the only times I would really change it outside of this was for like no good. I would take one out of Grace Period and put one into Just in Time. However, recently I found, and this was specifically pertaining to last week, which was a Grievous week, in places like no good, I actually started taking a point out of Grace Period and putting it over here into Spiritual Clarity, which gave me 20-second Spirit Bloom. This is just because I needed to have enough Empower spells, like enough like burst healing to get people out of Grievous. So this is another option. Again, you only take Just in Time instead of no kid, so I'm mostly saying that you could take the option of having the extra Spirit Bloom. I also did this inside of Court of Stars this week. So this is my most basic build. Now outside of that, there are several options, and I encourage you to like not just cookie cutter like copy my build, but like try out different things. Because I'd say there's about 3 major builds you could go. So this is one of them. The other option is to not play Temporal Anomaly and instead go like heavy on the Dream Breath healing and play Renewing Breath while still maintaining the damage that you get from your Fire Breath. This just means that instead of like relying on Temporal Anomaly to put out your echoes and stuff like that for reversion and stuff, you're just taking the time to hardcast them more, and I'll get more into that into playstyle. And then the other option is to just go like completely healing heavy, not put any points into damage for the most part. Let me just pick something up, my friend. Something like this, basically, where you're just putting all of your points into healing and not putting anything into damage. So this is something that I usually run inside of like Ruby Life Pools and Temple of the Jade Serpent. For the most part, not always, but especially on keys that are like Grievous or have some kind of like bursting, some kind of like other heavy healing aspect to them, because both those keys aren't super tight on timer, and you're usually so focused on healing that you're not really getting to spend enough globals to DPS to take full advantage of them, and you're better off just playing something like this. So between those 3 builds, I would definitely suggest you take like explore some iteration of them, like move around your town points, find out what you like best. There is no like black and white, this is best type of thing, I think right now, especially with the recent patch. Like you can, like me putting 1 point in Power Nexus could easily be Spark of Insight. You could also easily play Ouroboros. Like both of those are really good options. If you don't want to do the extra energy loop and like mana and damage here, you can also take Time of Need. If you feel like you need a shorter rewind for something, then you can take that too. Like there are lots of really good options, and also the 2 things that I didn't talk about at all that are actually like really good money points are both Flow State, not so much Accelerating Burst. I would mostly just say Flow State. So Flow State especially is also something you want to take if you are playing Nose Dormers, which is something I haven't talked about yet. So this is something I'd only take if I'm playing a damage build, and this is generally what I take inside of something like Azure Vault and Academy. Before I said those are dungeons where I would run the ring. This is also dungeons where I'd consider running Nose Dormers. Nose Dormers is really good for damage because it makes you get more Fire Breaths, and the name of the game is to be pressing Temporal Anomaly off CD to reduce the CD on your power spells, and also making sure that you're pressing your empower spells every 10 seconds to keep up flow state to also give them further CDR. And the more fire breaths you have, the more damage you can do. Fire breath is a lot of damage. Okay, that's all for the right side. Hopefully I gave you a good idea. Like I said, please explore and try out different things in this tree. There are a lot of good options. The only thing that I would really avoid in Mythic Plus right now is avoiding all of the Emerald Blossom talent points, except maybe play with Ouroboros, but these other ones, I really would not suggest you play with them, but everything else is definitely on the table for you to play with. Okay, so over here, this week is Sanguine, so I am taking the reduced CD on Wing Buffet. I'm not taking that, I'm putting a point in here. I also often play things like Deep Breath Stun. Okay, so moving over to the left side of the tree. So Landside is a nice little like CC you have, and it also lets you get down to Quell, which is your interrupt, so that's really important. And then Obsidian Scales, you want to make sure that you're getting down to where Obsidian Scales has an extra charge. You also want to make sure you're having Verdant Embrace. Scarlet Adaptation, really good for damage. Please make sure you're taking this one. This point is more important than this point over here, but this is also a good point to take, which isn't kindled. And then the idea from here is basically Cauterizing Flame, really good spell, is the idea is that you're getting down to Zephyr. So you're gonna notice, and the one thing people ask me is, why are you taking this point? Like Emerald Blossom heals 2 additional allies, but like I never press Emerald Blossom, so why would I ever take that? It's because otherwise it takes 2 points to get down here, and I'd rather have the extra point to play with. However, last 2 seconds longer is something I really like inside of like Nokid, because there's a lot of movement on all of the bosses that you have to do constantly in order to keep casting. So if I can, I usually try and take this instead of Nokid instead of this, but for the most part, this is what I take. And then you get down here to Renewing Blaze. I always take the one that reduces the cooldown. They recently buffed this one. There might be some pretty good use for Foci of Life, though I haven't really played with it yet, but I encourage you to play with it. And then of course you want to get down to Zephyr, which is really good for Mythic Plus. For any kind of AoE, like most boss AoEs, it works on it. It reduces the damage I do and even some like trash. Really useful. Over here again, making sure getting down to Interrupt. Instinctive Arcana is normally like the first place I start like pulling points from. And normally those points go down here to Time Spiral or Tear of the Sky, so I'm not gonna get ahead of myself. You wanna make sure you're taking Tip the Scales. So you don't have to take Inherent Resistance, Draconic Latency, or Instinctive Arcana, but you do need to put 2 points in at least this or this in order to make sure that you get down to Blast Furnace. This is really important. How you get down here though is not nearly as important. They recently buffed Draconic Latency. It used to be 4%, but now it's 6%, so that's also really good. Blast Furnace, really good for damage. A Rusting Roar, really underrated and good inside of a coordinated group. Less good if you're in a less coordinated group. So like if you aren't in a coordinated group and you just want to go ahead and take Protracted Talons, so Azure Strike does more damage, that's completely fine as well. And then you just want to make sure you're getting to Leaping Flames. So like the money pieces like over here are Blast Furnace, Leaping Flames, Aerial Mastery, and Zephyr. I'd say like these are like your main like things that you're trying to get to, and the rest are just like points of like how am I going to get there and what other utility can I pick up along the way. So because we often run with a double range comp, we don't have a lot of CC, I take Tear of the Skies in about 80% of dungeons. I also take Time Spiral in about at least 3 if not 5 different dungeons, just because speeding up the rate at which like we travel through some of these dungeons, especially when they're indoors and you can't mount, is pretty dang good. I also try to take Rescue sometimes. Twin Guardian, I definitely always try to take in something like Nokid. This is really underrated. It's an extra defensive that you can use every minute. Like 30% of your maximum health is a lot. It's not just a defensive for yourself, it's also defensive for someone else, and really powerful against one shots inside of Tyrannical. Another one that seems obvious, like why wouldn't you take this every single time, is Lush Growth. However, Lush Growth is like Lush Growth and Instinctive Arcana are usually the 2 spots where my points start getting pulled from the fastest. So sometimes I get 2 points in here, but more often than not, I have to like, even like this week, like I can't even do this week. I have to do this for Sanguine Week. More often than not, I can't get 2 points in here and 2 points in here, but if I have 2 extra points to play with, like let's say it's like Academy, I don't need Time Spiral or something, I'll put it here. And then let's say it's some other, like it's like Ruby Life Pools, I don't need Time Spiral in there, but maybe I want some extra healing, so then I will put a point in Lush Growth. and this can go along with that and get moved around. I move around my talent points on this side of the tree much more often than I do on this side. Okay, so that is let's pretend that was a quick overview of talents, even though that took me forever. Okay, so now on to playstyle. So the first and most basic thing I want to talk to you about is keeping your reversions up. So I've already talked a little bit about reversion, what it has to do with it is increased by your 2-piece, and it also gives you your 4-piece proc, which is your instant living flames that also do increased healing and damage. And also due to the fact that we're playing Grace Period, it's making it so that everyone who has reversion on them is taking 10% increased healing from all sources. If they have 2 reversions on them, that means they're taking 21% increased healing from all sources. This is really good. So I just put out a Dream Breath, but everyone who already has the reversion on them is also taking 10% increased healing from that Dream Breath at whatever other healing I do. So it's a really good habit when you're first starting out to try and keep out reversions as much as possible. It's not just like an easy like healing gimme, but it's also going to increase your damage because you're getting 4-piece procs out of it, and it's also going to be feeding into your Scarlet adaptation whenever you need it, just due to the ticking healing nature of it. Okay. Beyond that, what's the first button you press as soon as everybody starts taking a little bit of damage? Your usual go-to is going to be Dream Breath. So Dream Breath is probably your most important empower spell, at least right now. So it is mostly a hot component. So the more you charge it, it doesn't necessarily increase the amount of healing that it does. Instead, it just increases how much of it is upfront healing to hot healing. So there is a time and a place where you will charge it all the way, but for the most part, most of the time, by and large, you're actually only charging it to 1, as you see me doing right there, in order to leave a hot on top of everyone. Beyond that, if you need more healing after the Dream Breath, then you're usually turning to a Spirit Bloom. So Spirit Bloom is all big bursty healing. There's no hot component, at least not right now. There will be next tier with the new tier set, but right now it is all just upfront big bursty healing. So there is a time and a place where you do choose Spirit Bloom over Dream Breath. Most that usually comes with things like Grievous, where you need to get people out of that pretty quickly, and you can't rely on the hot from Dream Breath to take everyone back up reliably, and you're just going to have to Spirit Bloom anyways. But most of the time, you're going to be picking Dream Breath and then going over to Spirit Bloom. Now beyond that, the other small CD that kind of fits in with all of this is going to be your Temporal Anomaly. So there's a couple ways to use Temporal Anomaly. The first and foremost one is to spread your reversions like I was talking about. This is the primary reason that I still like Resonating Sphere. So with 10.07, the Resonating Sphere and Temporal Anomaly just in general got majorly nerfed about how much like free healing you get, but I can't deny how good it is to just keep reversions on the whole group the entire time and be buffing all my other healing. It is possible, of course, to get reversions out the old-fashioned way by just casting echoes, but that's a lot of globals, a lot of work that honestly I just don't like putting in, so I still prefer playing Resonating Sphere and just spreading all of my reversions that way to get through. On top of that, whenever you're not using it to spread reversions, you can also be using it with things like Dream Breath. So there's two ways, there's more than one, more than two I should say, two primary ways to use Resonating Sphere inside of Dream Breath. And before I get there, I shouldn't skip ahead of myself, I should talk about Call of Viscera. So you are almost never going to press Dream Breath if you can help it, unless you Verdant Embrace and have a Call of Viscera buff before. So that means that if you're going to also be using Temporal Anomaly, there's two options. You can either do a Temporal Anomaly into a Verdant Embrace, which then makes all of those echoes you just put out into a Life Bind, right here, and then do a Dream Breath, and you get a buff Dream Breath, and everybody is sharing health with that Life Bind. Or you can do a Verdant Embrace into a Temporal Anomaly, and then press Dream Breath, and then everybody who gets hit by the Dream Breath now has 2 iterations of the hot on them instead of just 1. So then it's more hot healing from that. So I would say the combination of doing Verdant, like TA, Verdant Embrace, and Dream Breath was more popular before 10.0.7, since now the life bind that you get out of that is only going to be 18% of shared healing instead of what it was before, which is the 40% like the tooltip reads, since it's getting reduced to only 40% effectiveness. So I would say the more popular way, the more commonly used way, and there is a time and a place for both, is usually going to be that you Verdant Embrace, Temporal Anomaly, and then Dream Breath. So you can see that one has 2. It's a little bit buggy right now because I'm on the training day. Going back to what I was saying, so between those 3, those are your 3 main ways of leveraging healing. And of course, you're probably wondering, well, how does that fit into all of my CDs? So your main CDs, of course, are going to be Stasis, Rewind, Tip the Scales, and Emerald Communion. So a pretty common question I get all the time is, what do I put inside my stasis? And I'm going to give you a simple answer and then I'll give you a more complex one. You want to make sure there's at least a Dream Breath or a Spirit Bloom in there. And then ideally on top of that, you want to make sure that maybe there's a Temporal Anomaly in there if you're playing that. And outside of that, it doesn't really matter. Like, the thing is, ideally, it depends on the situation, and there's so many different situations where one thing is better than the other that I don't want to say anything too like black and white. You just want to make sure there's at least one Empower spell. Depending on the fight, sometimes you can get 2 empowered spells in, but sometimes if it's like a constant healing fight, you're not always going to have both empowered spells available. And a pretty common one that you're going to see is what I just described to you, which is just going to be like VE, Temporal Anomaly, into a Dream Breath. Now, the thing about this one is though, is this is all hot healing. Like there is no like direct burst healing. So this is like a great thing that I'll do on something like the second boss in Court of Stars, where I will set this up, I will let the double Dream Breath hot tick out for the next 10 seconds, and then once it runs out, then I'll redetonate it. And so that means for like 20 seconds that I have double Dream Breath ticking on everyone during like constant healing. However, on a fight where I need a lot of burst healing, like say back to back, like say something like Sadama Blood Fury, let's say I'm setting up a stasis during the eclipse, and she's going to do her whispers right after. By the time she does her whispers and I have my eclipse set up and where I want to detonate it, they still have that previous Dream Breath ticking, and also that's not enough healing for me to heal through a whispers. Like I definitely need like a full Spirit Bloom, and also if I was doing that, that's also definitely a situation where I'd take the time to like fully charge up a Dream Breath. I don't want to get ahead of myself though. I do just want to say that there are different situations, and I have a lot of boss guides for individual bosses to show you what my usual combinations are for each boss, because it does change per boss. There's not just like some cookie cutter stasis, but I do just want to say, ideally put one of the 2 Empower spells in your stasis, and ideally put a Temporal Anomaly. Temporal Anomaly not required, but I would say that putting an Empowered spell in there is required, and the rest is not required. If you just do like a VE, a Spirit Bloom, and 1 Echo, that's fine. If you do a Spirit Bloom into a TA into a VE, that's fine. If you do a Dream Breath into a TA into an Echo, that's not the greatest, but it's probably fine. It just depends on the situation you're in. Sometimes it's just like you just have to throw together whatever you have off CD, because you just need to get through like that last 10 seconds of the fight, or you just need some kind of burst healing somewhere. It's also like you don't have to use it just for group healing. If you are just going like, say you're an Azure Vault and you're just going like trash pack to trash pack and there's no group damage going on, but your tank is taking damage the whole time, you can just do a stasis that is like, okay, I'm going to like TA him, I'm gonna like Verdant Embrace him. For some reason my thing is being buggy. I'm gonna Verdant Embrace him, I'll pretend I'm the tank, Living Flame him, and then I'll put like an Echo there. Ideally you would put the Echo before Living Flame so it would be buffed, but you get the idea. Like you could use it like that as well. You could also use it just to do 3 spells at the beginning of Azure Vault. Like there's so many things, and I have videos about how you can use Cauterizing Flame inside of stasis. There are so many good ways to use stasis, but for by and large, just the healing part of stasis, again, make sure you just put either Spirit Bloom or Dream Breath inside of there, ideally a TA, and you know, just something else. It's gonna take time to get used to. There's so many like different like interactions and combinations and things you can do that I wouldn't try and overcomplicate it to begin with. Okay, that's our first major CD. The second one is Rewind. So Rewind, it's not good in every single situation, but it is a really, really good CD in 5-man, especially since it heals 100% of the damage that is taken in a 5-man group. When it says healing increase 100% non-raid, that means that 100% of the damage you've taken in the last 5 seconds is going to get healed, which makes it a very, very good CD. This is a no-brainer. If your group just took damage and you need to top them up before the next damage event, then you press Rewind. If your group just took damage and they're not taking damage again for the next 10 seconds, don't press Rewind, press something else and save Rewind for when you're going to need it. Rewind is especially good on things like rot fights or things like Laymore, like where there's a consuming stomp right after he does the brands. So it's like if you get the brands, everyone drops below 10, like it's like 10% HP, and then you have about 6 seconds to top everyone out before the consuming stomp comes out. Things like that is where Rewind is really going to shine. So I'm not going to get too much into Rewind because I feel like that one's pretty self-explanatory and you'll get a feel for it. Next one I'm going to talk about though is Emerald Communion. So Emerald Communion used to be super easy because all you would do is you just be like, oh, we're gonna press Temporal Anomaly. I have my echoes on everyone, and then I'm just going to Verdant Embrace and Emerald Communion. However, this isn't really an option anymore because the lifelines that you're getting out of your Temporal Anomaly Echoes are now only healing for 18% instead of 40%. So in some situations, this is enough healing. Raid. But in a lot of situations inside of keys, you're actually going to have to take the time to fully set up echoes on your party in order to set a Emerald Communion in order to heal through things. That means taking the time to echo at least 2 of your DPS, and maybe even your DPS and your tank if you also want your tank to get hit by it. You don't have to echo 4 people because you can Verdant Embrace whoever the last person is that you missed with the echo, and then you need to Verdant Embrace them and press Emerald Communion. A super good CD. I highly recommend you take advantage of it, even though it's a pain in the heck to set up. And like I said before in the talent section, Rush of Vitality in high keys is good as an extra defensive. Most of the time I would suggest that you just run Dreamwalker though, because now that you have to set up all these globals for your Emerald Communion, it's even harder to be like, okay, I need to echo, and then I need to hover, and then I need to Verdant Embrace, and then I need to Emerald Communion. That's a whole extra global you need to put in when sometimes you just don't have the time. So for the most part, unless you're doing like, you're starting off in high keys where you need the extra health, I would suggest you just go Dreamwalker. The more comfortable you get, run Rush of Vitality. You just know that it's going to be a whole extra global you need to set up before you can use that CD. And then your 4th like major throughput CD is of course going to be Tip the Scales. 2-minute CD, super simple, like your oh shit button, like oh my god I need healing right now, and most of the time you are Tip the Scaling a Spirit Bloom. Like I said, Dream Breath, most of the time you're only charging to 1. You could charge it and use a Tip the Scale Spirit Bloom. I mean Dream Breath in some situations, but most of the time it is going to be a Tip the Scale Spirit Bloom because for the most part this is my oh shit button. And then the other CD that you of course want to think about is Zephyr, which is your defensive CD that's on your whole party. You want to make sure that you're getting in range of everyone, so everyone's getting hit by it, and you're mostly just using it so that they take less AoE damage. So anything that avoidance works on, or feint from like a rogue, that's what Zephyr is going to work on. In coordinated groups, we use this a lot to get through like bosses like Croth. I already mentioned things like Laymore and stuff like that, like big, heavy AoE hitting things that might one-shot you. It's also good for like taking damage on things like Sedana that I was talking about before. But yeah, just use that at your own discretion. Use it as much as you can in AoE situations. About Evoker utility, because some of it is really unique to Evokers. So the first one I already talked about a little bit, which is time dilation, which is basically just like a tank external, or it can be used to save someone from a one-shot. I just talked about that, so I'm not going to go too much into it. I just remind you that it is basically a utility button for us. And then most of our utility is over here in this other tree. The first 2 are of course our racials, which are both pretty good. So Wing Buffet, which is basically a typhoon, allows you to push mobs away. So this is really good on Sanguine Week, and on Sanguine Weeks you want to make sure that you're taking the reduced CD in order to be able to use it more often. And then Tail Swipe is also really good. So previous to Dragonflight, there weren't any like true knockups. There were like knockaways like Typhoon and Thunderstorm and stuff like that. However, this was the first expansion where they added Tail Swipe, which is a knockup, and then they also gave Shamans the option to have a knockup by making Thunderstorm a knockup instead of a knockaway. So those are the only 2 ways for you to get the knock up. These are nice stops because it displaces the enemy without like having to make your group like chase them, or you're not gonna like knock them behind your tank and make them melee your tank in the back or anything like that. So these are both really good stops that you want to make sure that you're using in dungeons like Azure Vault and Ruby. Both have a lot of stops that you need, especially in like Ruby. You can't use good stops on some of the mobs when they're shielded, and you have to use something like this in order to stop them. You also have access to a AoE stun with Deep Breath if you want to, so I wouldn't always suggest this, but like I said, we usually run with double ranged and we need extra AoE stops, so I'm usually running this one. Pressing Roar, really underrated, really good when you're like pairing it with like Hodge or some other kind of like long stun or anything like that. Even as like Boomkins get value out of it when they're running mushrooms, so my Boomkin will often ask for it in like a big AoE pack. You can also take Overawe during Raging Weeks, or you can even just take it for the first pull instead of Academy, the one in front of the trees. This is the only AoE suit in the game, and it is super strong. like Raging Week used to feel almost unplayable. It feels so much better with Overall, so it's like amazing that we have this like available to us. So like Pressing Roar, already super unique. Overall, absolutely amazing. Time Spiral, like I said, if you run with a prop paladin especially who doesn't have force all the time, this gives your rogue sprint. I think druid, it just gives them like dash. It's different for every single class. Some classes like get Leap of Faith, which is basically like the grip from freeze, which is almost useless, but other classes get like really good things and they're really slow, especially in dungeons like Azure Vault and Shadow Burial Grounds. And your group, if they're those slow classes, will probably love you if you take this for them. You also have access to Rescue, which I talked about a bit before. Really good for being able to catch up on those dungeons I just talked about, which don't have a lot of movement. There's also some cool things you can do here in No Kid Offensive with this. Also, Twin Guardian, super underrated. I've recently started playing this a lot more, especially like last week I started playing it more than I was before, and I was like, I absolutely love this spell. It's just a little bit disorienting for the person that you're rescuing to give them a shield sometimes. So you just want to make sure that you're giving them a warning. So yeah, our utility is really good and really unique. And also, I don't want you to forget about Landslide. This is one that I used to forget about all the time. There's not a whole lot of use for this because the CD is so long on it, but definitely want to make sure that you're taking advantage of this, especially on something like a Spiteful Week. How to do DPS as an evoker inside of a dungeon. So this is my damage breakdown. You're gonna see the highest thing that I'm doing is Living Flame, and the next highest thing is Fire Breath. So Fire Breath is basically the name of the game. The main thing you want to be focusing on if you want to be increasing your DPS. So before I even talk about Fire Breath though, I do want to remind you, as I reminded you during our playstyle talk, is to keep out your reversions. Keeping out reversions means more 4-piece procs, more Living Flame damage. Very, very good. So you want to make sure that you're getting as many of these 4-piece procs as possible during the dungeon. It's not only going to help with your spot healing if you need it, but also with your damage. Now, as far as Fire Breath goes, so you have options. It's the same as Dream Breath, where the amount that you charge it doesn't change the amount of damage that it does. However, it does change the amount of Leaping Flame charges you get. So for every single time you charge it, you get an extra Leaping Flame stack, which makes it so that your Living Flame will jump. So if you are fighting one target, you're charging it to 1. You're fighting 2 targets, you're charging it to 1. You're fighting 3 targets, you're charging it to 2. You're fighting 4 targets, you're charging it to 3. 5 or more, you're charging it to 4. You get the idea. So whenever you're in an AoE pack, for the most part, you're always going to be fully charging it all the way. And you have your 4 Leaping Flame stacks. However, I'm not spending these yet. I don't have a 4-piece proc. So I need to make sure, because I let my reversions fall, that I'm putting out reversion, and while I'm waiting, I will just Azure Strike while I wait. Oh, I have my 4-piece proc, and then now I will spend it. It's important to wait for your 4-piece proc to spend your Leaping Flames charges. It is also important for you to get full value out of your Scarlet Adaptation before you spend those. So I talked about this a bit in the talent section. So store 20% of your effective healing up to 17,000, and it's consumed in your next Living Flame. So because you're keeping out those reversions all the time, and your tank or some range DPS that is standing in something is probably taking damage, you're probably going to, for the most part, always have close to 100% Scarlet Adaptation. So sometimes it's worth like sitting there and just waiting for it to get to 100% before you spend that Leaping Flames charge, especially, or just before you Living Flame at all. And those 2 things alone, if you just focus on those, keeping out your reversions, waiting to spend your Leaping Flames until you get your 4-piece proc, and also keeping track of your Scarlet Adaptation, are going to increase your damage a lot. As far as single target damage goes, Disintegrate is good. Well, this is not a dummy I can hit. This is a dummy I can hit. Woo! Disintegrate is good. However, whenever your Scarlet Adaptation gets 200%, even if you have enough essence to disintegrate, definitely make sure you stop any Living Flame and you consume that. So making sure that you're keeping out hot healing all the time so that you're constantly getting healing from that and not having to stop and heal to get value from it is also why it's really important to keep out your reversion. Okay, so I just want to give some closing thoughts before I end this guide. I want to say that I easily could have made this video over 4 hours. I did try my best to be brief, even though this is a long video, especially on the playstyle part. I did my best to be as brief and as general as possible because the different kinds of like combinations and differences in decision making on this class are so large with the different types of spells we have. I would not say this is a super beginner friendly class. So if you were just not picking this class, please give yourself grace. This is a complicated spec. I would not say it's very beginner friendly. I would say that before the changes in 10.0.7, it was beginner friendly just because it was so strong that even when you messed up, you often weren't punished. However, that is no longer the case. So please give yourself grace. Try different combinations. Don't just do what I said. Try out your own thoughts, your own combinations. Check out other content creators and see what they're doing and to see what works best for you. I also want to say that once you do further get into playing the class and you like encounter some hard bosses and stuff, I have lots of guides specifically for the hard bosses, as well as just full dungeon walkthroughs if you want to check those out. I go into a lot more specific decision making and how I use my spells and utility on Evoker than I did in this video. Thank you so much for watching, and good luck playing Evoker. I hope you have fun.